Hello everyone, this is Muhammad Tuhami, author of Midway Simplicity, and welcome to a new episode of the Midway Decluttering Show, where you will find practical tips and advice on how to declutter your first 100 items. And my very special guest today is Lori Lippincott, and I hope that I pronounced the name correctly, but she is the awesome mind behind Loving Simple Living blog. It's a great blog, one of my favorites, and she's the author of 3 books on simplicity. So welcome, Lori Lee. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for
Did I
having
make it
me.
right? Lori Lee Lippincott? Is it right?
Yeah, Laura Lee Lippincott.
So I made
It's kind of a tongue twister.
it. That's great. So let's start by your story. How did you declutter your first 100 items?
Well, it was about 2 years ago, and almost exactly. And I was traveling. I've got 2 kids, and my husband does construction. And we were traveling because he had construction work about 5 hours away. And so we were living down there in a hotel, and we had very little because we were living in a hotel. But we had fun. There was all kinds of other stuff to do with the kids, and there was nothing. I didn't have tons of housework. And we're like, man, I wonder if we could travel more often, and do more things with the kids like this if we didn't have a house to take care of. And I think, and I was just thinking yesterday, like there's really a point where you shift your thinking from I want more, bigger, better, nicer to wait a second. Maybe this is too much. Maybe I don't need quite as much. And it's like that initial thinking and you're like, oh, it's like the aha moment, like, wait a second. And so we kind of went through that and we're like, well, maybe we didn't know anybody else who did. And I didn't have any time to be on the computer because I was taking care of, my family and my house and everything else. So I didn't know anything about simplicity or minimalism, but we're like, well, maybe, that would be really weird, but it might work for us, so when we came back, it was January 2 years ago. We thought, well, let's just kind of test out the decluttering. And I remember the first thing I went to, so my first 100 things was probably almost entirely books, which is hard. I love books, and I never kept tons, but I had one bookshelf, and I went through it and said, am I really going to read this again? Or a few books, on there that you wish you want to read, and they've been sitting there for like 3 years. You've wanted to read them and you've never read them. And probably if they've been there for 3 years, you're not going to read them. And I went through and I got rid of almost 90% of the books. And like that was hard, I mean, and I'm sure, you're a writer, and books are kind of something that, you hold on to. Because they have value and you enjoyed them. And they were mostly nonfiction books for me too. I don't read too much fiction, so it's something you might go back to reference. But I'm like, you know what, if I want to go back and reference it, I can find it at the library, or I can buy a Kindle version or something else. But they're sitting here and I'm really only using a few of them for reference. Really, the amount I've opened in the last 6 months is, 5 or 6 of them. So most of my first 100 items were books. But when I realized, it kind of went with like the 80-20 principle that a lot of people talk about. Of my, maybe 50, 60 books, I only used about 20% of them. And when I actually sat there and made myself, make the decision, I was able to get rid of 80%. And that's kind of really what solidified that thinking. I'm like, if I can do that with my bookshelf, then I bet I can do that with the rest of the house. And so, I mean, I don't remember exactly where I went after my bookshelf. So that might have not got me to the first 100 things, but that was the thing that really changed my thinking. And so we went room to room, closet to closet. And for most places, we could get rid of about 50% of what we did. And that was 2 years ago. And since then, we've ended up getting rid of so much more. It kind of just gets the ball rolling. But for me, it was the books, which was is something I wouldn't have expected because books are so
Yeah.
important to me.
Usually, and the other interviews I did, usually the number one place people go to start the decluttering process is the wardrobe or closet to get rid of some clothes that the old clothes
Yes.
that they don't need. But books, this is very brave, you know. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
No, see, and we really never had that much. I never had stuff in my closet that didn't fit. I had too many clothes, and I've since decluttered all of that. But we had my fault was keeping things for the future. Like I would find things that my kids would fit into like 4 years in the future, but if it was a good deal, I'd buy it. But I don't need to store things for my kids 4 years down the road. Like that's excessive. So, I mean, that was an area I hit later, but we never had like all the bulk, from, when my kids were babies or anything else. I was always good about getting rid of that, but I still had a full house that we were able to mostly entirely clean out. And now we're down to a 1-bedroom apartment, and there's hardly anything in it, and we have lots of room to play and work. So it's been a huge transformation that all started with books.
Amazing. So let me share with you some of the challenges that I receive from people who are trying to declutter their stuff. The first thing is I'm overwhelmed by too much stuff, so I can't think of starting the decluttering work.
Yes, yes, and in a way, and I don't mean to make a plug for my book, but in a way, that's why I wrote the book I just released, the 30 days, because it's very overwhelming when you make that shift in your head and you're like, maybe I need less. All of a sudden, everything becomes excess, and every closet you look in and every room you go into, you're like, oh, like I need to go through all of this, and it's just days and weeks and months, and it's just overwhelming. You just want to sit down and give up. So in my book, I went through and did 30 different areas. 15 of them are tangible, so they're, dealing with material stuff. And then 15 are like our time and our thinking and our habits. And it goes back and forth, and it just takes a little piece. Go through this little piece. Go through your kitchen counters is lesson 4. So, and practice with that and clear all that off. And so you practice doing little pieces in 30 different areas. And then at the end of the month, you can say, okay, I've got started in 30 areas. Maybe 10 of them I'm done in, because they weren't a big deal. But now I can go back on the other 20 areas and work more. But because I've got that initial ball rolling and started, I can keep going. So, I mean, I would say my book, but also if you make a list and say, this is all the areas of my house. And I would like to go through it all in 6 months. That means I need to go through this week, and this week, and this week, and then celebrate, your small victories. If you go through this closet and that's what you were supposed to do this week, sit down and treat yourself to a chocolate and a fancy coffee or something, and be proud and of your accomplishment and the fact that it fits into the whole thing instead of just trying to tackle the whole thing at once. Because now I can go through my whole house in a day, but before, I mean, it just makes you sit down and cry. Overwhelming.
That's a very smart idea. So instead of 30 days, you specified 30 areas to start
Yeah.
declutter. So you made it more specific and easier for people to.
Yeah. I mean, and exactly like what you're saying, you just have to get a little bit in each area. And once you get a little bit in each area, then it just is easier to keep going.
Yeah. And the second challenge is what about lacking organizational skills?
Well, see, most of that, and I think it's kind of funny because I think most of that is having too much stuff. If you have no stuff, organizing is very easy. So that's kind of and I think I wrote a blog post a while ago as a guest post for something. You don't need organization, you need minimalism,
Yeah.
It's not about a bunch of fancy colored and labeled totes that you need. It's less stuff. And so right now, all we have, both my husband and I and our 2 kids, all of us share one closet, and it's not a big closet.
Are you serious?
Yeah. I've got pictures I'm putting up on my blog tomorrow of it. But if
Awesome.
we've done like the Project 33 that Courtney Carver has, and so we each have about 33 items, and so you can put, your 120, whatever that, adds up to, in one closet, And so, I mean, the kids have one side, and we have one side of shelves, and we have laundry in the middle, and the kids can kind of still turn it into a disaster. But if you have less stuff, organization isn't near as big of a problem. So I say tackle the decluttering first. So you declutter as much as you can, and then declutter again and again and again, because usually you have to go through a couple times and then worry about organization with what you have left. And it's much easier.
Okay, that's awesome. So now the other challenge is that I'm too exhausted to face the decluttering work because I have so many other tasks and people to take care of, and I don't know whether I have the time or the energy to do the decluttering work.
Yeah, and I think that's tough. I mean, because I think a lot of times our clutter is not just our house. Our clutter is also our thinking, and our clutter is our schedule, and our clutter is our habits. So I think it's very important to kind of address all of it, as much as that sounds overwhelming. Little bits of all of it at the same time. And yeah, like in my book, and I didn't mean to try and plug my book the whole time, but that's what I dealt with habits.
Please share.
And
Let's
thinking.
share the awesomeness of your writings. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I alternate.
What's the title of the book?
With my book. So it's Simple Living: 30 Days to Less Stuff and More Life.
Cool. Yeah.
Sorry, I should have probably said that at the beginning.
Yeah.
So it's 30 days to less stuff and more life. And so it has 30 challenges, and 15 are tangible with material items in our house, and 15 are untangible. They deal with our schedule and our habits and everything else. And so I alternate. Sorry, that'll go off. I don't know if you can hear the phone ringing, but it alternates one day for tangible and one day for untangible. So you can kind of move your living to simpler, kind of as a joint process between your house and your head, I guess I should say.
Yeah. So now, I'm living in a so cluttered and consumer-based environment, and I'm facing a high resistance from my family and friends. They think that I'm crazy by getting rid of all this stuff. So what can I do? How to deal with this situation?
Yeah, that's tough. And I'm crazy. And I say there are a few people now that we hang out with in person, I should say, here in Nebraska, that have started decluttering and following a simple living path. But for the most part, most of the people that I hang out with and talk these things with are online, and that's why I've loved starting the blog, because all these other people are like, oh yeah, I'm doing that too. I love that. And I don't get that from the people I hang out with on the weekend. For the most part, they just accept the fact that I'm crazy, but there's a few people, and there's really a lot of us, but we're spread out over the world, that have these ideals and are really seeing the benefit from them. And so I would say, as much as, person to person relationship is so important, if you don't have anyone that's close to you that understands, connect with someone online. I love hearing from people on my blog. I answer every email I get, but I'm sitting in Nebraska, which is kind of random, out of the way place. And a lot of us are kind of spread out. So, and most people who write, a lot of the other big blogs will write back and we'll, if there's any questions or if there's any way we can encourage you. And it sounds bad, but you can't change anybody else around you. You can be an example. And if they see, oh, wow, she's doing, this was really crazy and I didn't know what she was doing before, but now it really seems to be working. They might kind of, accept some of it. But I think definitely with the minimalism, it's not anything you can do to change someone else's mind. You have to kind of be okay with being different and find other people different like you online.
Yeah. Now let's move on to the decluttering decision-making process. For example, what if I own items that are associated with good memories? What if I own precious and valuable items? but I no longer need? What if I own valuable gifts that I receive from people I love and care about, but I no longer need them? So, what to do about these types of items?
These are hard. These are hard types of items. I think memories are very important, and so I guess the thing that really made a lot of sense to me was a post on Simple Notebook. I think it's simplenotebook.net. I always get it confused, but she wrote about, if say 50 years from now, we're dying and passing on to the next generation. What do you really want to pass on to the next generation? Do you want to pass them on a box of like the coolest stuff, from your life, or do you want to pass on a storage unit to them? And that really made sense to me. Like, so when I keep things, I have one or two plastic tubs that I have memory things in. I have my wedding dress because my daughter is going to love to try it on and see it, and she loves playing with it. And I have their baby clothes and the things they came home in the hospital with. And I have our wedding pictures because those are all things that I treasure and I know my kids are going to treasure. But that's not everything. Like, it hardly includes anything from any of our vacations. We just take memories from vacation. And it doesn't include everything from every Christmas. And it doesn't include, we have a picture or two from birthdays, but we don't keep everything. We just keep the most important things. So what I tell people to do is I say, okay, look at everything that you have in your house that is associated with a memory, and try and figure out how much space that's taking, and then try and figure out how much space you want it to take. And if you give yourself a limit and say, okay, this closet I will store memory things in, or these boxes I will store memory things in, and then figure out what fits and what doesn't, and that helps make the decision better. If it's valuable things, I definitely tell people to sell them. It sounds terrible, like we don't like people. But people are not in the things they give us. Just because you don't keep something that someone gave you doesn't mean you don't like them or appreciate them or remember them. But I understand why people think that. It's just the logical decision of saying, I'm not going to not be friends with them if I get rid of this. And it's not worth taking care of and maintaining and having a bigger house and everything else just so we can keep items that don't really mean anything. The person is what means something. So a lot of people take pictures of them. Someone commented on my blog that especially kids' drawings are really big. So she took all of her kids' drawings and she took pictures of them, and then she put them on a little flash drive. And so then she has them on one of those picture frames. So she has one picture frame that cycles through all of her kids' drawings. And now instead of like a box or two of all these drawings from when they were kids, she just has a little memory stick, and she said she made two, so one can be in a safety deposit box, so it's extra safe. Make sure she still has them, but it's now way less, and she can actually enjoy them because they can all go through this electronic picture frame. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea, definitely. And what about the famous dilemma of what if? What if I will need this one day?
What if? Yeah. But I keep pulling from other people. Other people are my sources of great writing. The what if question, I really like how the minimalists dealt with that on their blog. They have like the 2020 rule, I think, and I'll have to, maybe I can try and send you some of these links because I'm not claiming the brilliance behind it. But their thing was their 2020 rule. If it costs less than $20 and you can get it in less than 20 minutes, then get rid of it. So if we're talking about, I just got rid of some hair products that I hardly ever use. Well, if I decide I need them, I can go grab them from the store. If I don't know if I'm going to need my car, I'm probably still going to keep it, because that's much harder to replace. Those are two, big separate ones. But what if can constitute like half the things in our house if we're not careful. So if it's a cheap item, and you can, if $20 is too much, you can say, if it's going to cost me less than $5 to replace, and I can replace it, in a day or two, then I'll get rid of it. So, a lot of times setting those rules make all the decisions easier, instead of just being overwhelmed.
And you can set your own rules if you'd like to set $100,
Yes,
$5, whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
But then you have a logical thing to apply to everything you're going through.
Yeah. Do you have like a kind of a checklist of questions that help you decide what you should keep and what you should get rid of?
I don't, but I could see at the very beginning of simplifying how it would help. Once you're used to decluttering, like I go through every couple of months, and like I just took a carload to the Goodwill here and donated it just last week. It becomes much easier once you're in the habit. But what I try and tell people is to write down, instead of a list like that, write down what they want their life to be like, what they want their life to look like, why they want simplicity. If you're wanting simplicity because you want more time to spend with your kids, or if you're wanting more time to spend on personal growth, write that down and then stick that somewhere you can see it. So when you're decluttering, it's not a matter of saying, I'm going to get rid of this. It's what I'm going to get. I'm going to get the time. I'm going to get the space. I'm going to get a less stressful life. And so then it's all about what we're adding to our life instead of what we're taking away. Because as humans, we have a hard time taking away. So we focus on adding those good things and remove everything that's in the way of those good things.
Yeah. And, decluttering is useless if the inflow is more than the outflow. So how to overcome my purchasing
Absolutely.
desires, I love to purchase new items. So how to control that desire so that decluttering really works?
You got to just stop going to the store. I mean, it's great to say.
That's easy.
I mean, I think it's great to say that you can have all the self-control, but not going to the store if you can help it. We don't have a TV anymore, and so we still get, some advertisements, because we still see TV places and we get them online. But getting rid of the TV helped because you're not constantly seeing all the things that then you wish you had. Because if people they're spending thousands and millions of dollars to convince you that you need new things, and that's very hard to stand up to with just sheer self-control. So getting away from advertisements, getting away from the store is the easiest, most fail-safe method.
Yeah. And could you share with us like a couple of your favorite decluttering techniques that are not too time consuming?
What I love is making sure there's a designated place in my house all the time. Right now it's the end of my bedroom, but it used to be in my laundry room, in my basement when I had bigger houses, that I can put things that are going to go out of the house. So it's not like you say, okay, on this Sunday I'm going to go through the house. It's all the time. If I'm picking up this afternoon and there's something that is laying on the living room floor that I'm like, oh, maybe I don't even need this. Instead of putting it away, I put it in a box that's going to either be sold or given away. So then, because I'm already going to have to pick it up in the first place. And so these things collect, and once I have a pile that's worth taking a trip somewhere or worth listing on, Amazon or something else, then I can do that. But it's kind of just an ongoing process. And the kids always know that if there's something they don't want, they can put it there instead of putting it away. And that saves the energy of having to touch it twice. And it just kind of keeps it all. I mean, you're able to declutter whenever you think of it.
That's cool. Do you have any other tip?
I'd love to say it's worth it. It's worth it. Like, I look back 2 years ago and it was so scary to declutter as far as we did. A lot of people are like, I'll declutter, I'm going to get rid of a carload of stuff, and that's good. But the difference of decluttering, we probably got rid of it at least 80%, if not more, of our stuff. And now if I think back, I hardly remember what most of it was. Like I thought, I'm like, well, what if I miss this? Or, like you were saying, what if I need this? And usually you don't. There's only a very few things that I can remember that I was getting rid of. And it's not that I missed them. It's just that, I remember they were bigger or they were in the way, or, it's not as bad as you think going into it, and it's worth it. You know, and if you change your mind, there's always more junk that you can
Yeah.
collect, you know, in the years in the future.
Yeah.
But it's definitely
Yeah.
worth it.
Yeah. So before we end the call, do you have like final thoughts or quotes or, the mantra that defines your decluttering philosophy or simple living philosophy?
I think it's kind of what I was saying before. It's about focusing on what you want your life to be and removing everything else. Switching from saying I don't want this in my life to saying I want this in my life, and I'm going to make sure that nothing else is in the way of it. For our family, we wanted more time to be together. We wanted my husband to have to work less, and so then we knew we had to live on less money. And I wanted to spend less time on housework so I could spend more time with the kids and more time. And so the other things just kind of fell, they were the obvious once we realized what we wanted to add to our life. And we really wanted to travel. And so now that we have a tiny apartment, it only costs us a couple $100s a month instead of, about $1,000 where our other house was. And Omaha is great for low living, low price living, but so now we've been able to travel. So we focus on the things that we're adding to our life instead of the things we're taking away.
That's great. You are so prolific and full of wisdom when it comes to simplicity. That's why I love your website, lovingsimpleliving.com. Thank you very much, Lori, for being my guest today, and I hope to have you again in a future show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye. Hello everyone, this is Muhammad Tuhami, author of Midway Simplicity, and welcome to a new episode of the Midway Decluttering Show, where you will find practical tips and advice on how to declutter your first 100 items. And my very special guest today is Lori Lippincott, and I hope that I pronounced the name correctly, but she is the awesome mind behind Loving Simple Living blog. It's a great blog, one of my favorites, and she's the author of 3 books.
We had fun. There was all kinds of other stuff to do with the kids, and there was nothing, I didn't have tons of housework. And we're like, man, I wonder if we could travel more often, and do more things with the kids like this if we didn't have a house to take care of. And I think, and I was just thinking yesterday, like there's really a point where you shift your thinking from I want more, bigger, better, nicer to wait a second. Maybe this is too much. Maybe I don't need quite as much. And it's like that initial thinking and you're like, oh, it's like the aha moment, like, wait a second. And so we kind of went through that and we're like, well, maybe we didn't know anybody else who did. And I didn't have any time to be on the computer because I was taking care of, my family and my house and everything else. So I didn't know anything. And like, that was hard, and I'm sure, you're a writer and books are kind of something that, you hold on to, because they have value and you enjoyed them. And they were mostly nonfiction books for me too. I don't read too much fiction. So it's something you might go back to reference. But I'm like, you know what, if I want to go back and reference it, I can find it at the library, or I can buy a Kindle version or something else. But they're sitting here and I'm really only using a few of them for reference. Really, the amount I've opened in the last 6 months is, 5 or 6 of them. So most of my first 100 items were books. But when I realized, it kind of went with like the 80-20 principle that a lot of people talk about. Of my thing about simplicity or minimalism, but we're like, well, maybe, that would be really weird, but it might work for us, so when we came back, it was January 2 years ago. We thought, well, let's just kind of test out the decluttering, and I remember the first thing I went to, so my first 100 things was probably almost entirely books, which is hard. I love books, and I never kept tons, but I had one bookshelf. And I went through it and said, am I really going to read this again? or a few books, on there that you wish you want to read. I mean, they've been sitting there for like 3 years. You've wanted to read them and you've never read them. And probably if they've been there for 3 years, you're not going to read them. And I went through and I got rid of almost 90% of the books.
On simplicity. So welcome, Lori Lee. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
Did I make it right? Lori Lee Lippincott? Is it right?
Yeah, Laura Lee Lippincott.
So I made it.
It's kind of a tongue twister.
That's great. So let's start by your story. How did you declutter your first 100 items?
Well, it was about 2 years ago, and almost exactly. And I was traveling. I've got 2 kids, and my husband does construction. And we were traveling because he had construction work about 5 hours away. And so we were living down there in a hotel, and we had very little because we were living in a hotel.